Let's talk about the 80's by Claire Rye. The characters portrayed in this work of fiction are entirely fictitious and have no relation to any real individuals, living or deceased. Any resemblance to actual persons, events, or entities is purely coincidental and unintentional. This narrative is a product of the author's imagination and is not based on any real-life events or personalities, all rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted in any form or by any means without prior written permission. Copyright 2024 by Claire Rye.
Epilogue. Okay, let's talk about the 80's. If you immediately think of leg warmers, teased hair and Pac-Man, then you are probably too young to have actually been there. If you are thinking about no internet public phone booths that smell like piss and how a stretch cassette tape meant the end of your favourite album, then you were there. Don't get me wrong, the 80's were great. Fucking great, actually, but let's not romanticise things too much. Vinyl does not add warmth and purity to the sound. A vinyl record is a fragile, noise-crackling, giant black frisbee of fear. It was like holding the musical equivalent of a Fabergé egg. I do miss the album covers, though. The tactile experience of sitting down and looking at the amazing artwork, the would like to thank list, and if you were lucky, a fold-out section for the lyrics. Nothing better. Nowadays, the tiny picture on my tiny screen in the middle of a playlist just doesn't connect me to the artist in the same way. You may have already heard, the 80's were a time when anything was possible. Greed was good, excess was normal, and self-expression came in so many different forms. That's true. The 80's were like that. But for those who didn't live it, let me take you back and give you a closer look. Ah yes, the greaty 80's. All right, I just made that up. No one really said that. Let's continue. Everywhere you looked, there was this wild mashup of music, fashion, and technology. It was like anything goes, and there wasn't this scripted cookie cutter, more of the same kind of mindset that we have today. It was freedom. Let's start with the fashion choices. Okay, some were questionable, they were something else, all right. But at least you actually had a choice. I'm talking fluoro-coloured spandex, shoulder pads big enough to double as pillows, and hairstyles that seem to defy the laws of physics. You could be a punk, a mod, a headbanger, new wave, pop, disco, hip-hop, or you could be anything in between, and there were a lot of in-betweeners. And oh, the music. A veritable rollercoaster ride of genres. You had the rebellious spirit of punk rock, the infectious beats of new wave, poppy stuff, disco stuff, early rap stuff, and those timeless rock anthems from bands we didn't realise were legends in the making. We took their talent for granted. Because there was so much talent. It was just the thing. No auto-tune, no sophisticated audio editing software. If you heard something ridiculously good, it was because it was ridiculously good. Full stop. But it wasn't just about the music and fashion. The 80's were a time of big moments. Blockbuster movies that defined a generation, iconic TV shows that are still binge-watched today, and who could forget the iconic history-making big moments like the fall of the Berlin Wall, Live Aid, and the invention of the mullet haircut. And amidst all of that going on, we were on the brink of something huge, the rise of personal computers and the dawn of the digital age. You could practically feel the excitement in the air. Actually, no, you couldn't. No one actually cared about technology. It wasn't really a thing and we didn't have any clue of what it would become, but we were doing it. Yes, granted back in the 80's, mobile phones weren't exactly the sleek, pocket-sized marvels we have now. It was more like lugging around a house brick with an antenna, but it was the birth of what you have today, and the 80's say, "You're welcome." During the 80's, I was in my youth, underage for the first half of the decade. However, that didn't stop me from having the time of my life. Picture this. A slim young thing with long blonde hair, green eyes, bronze youthful skin, and an hourglass figure that exuded maturity beyond her years. That was me, folks. I was hot. Back in the day, I was referred to as jailbait. I think that term is way too offensive now. It was kind of offensive then, but that didn't stop, more like encouraged, us to release our first hit single under the same name. Oh yeah, that's right, I forgot to mention, I was in a rock band as well. Now I have your attention, but more about that later. Jailbait was a tremendous success. Locally, it was banned before we made it properly famous. Maybe we should have rethought the name. The younger me wanted the controversy, but now the older me wants the royalty check. We totally should have renamed the single. It was a good song despite its, what's the word I'm looking for, immature stupidness. So, let's recap. I am young, I am hot, I am in a rock band, and it's the 80s. Right, so now you know I have got some juicy stories I could tell. But I only want to tell you one. My story, a story of choices. How I was, what I became, and the one decision that led me to this very moment. A moment filled with unregretful regret. Does that make sense? Probably not. But maybe once you get to know me, it will. I don't want to sound all serious, though. In the midst of all the mess and pain, there was a beautiful chaos of laughter and love, and I wouldn't trade it for anything else. For all of my life's faults, scars, bumps and bruises, I wouldn't have done it any other way. Maybe the peroxide crimped mullet could have done with a rethink, but overall I wouldn't change a thing. That's just life, my life, and I am ready to share it with you now. You coming or what? 1965. Born to be wild. I was born in Gosford, New South Wales, Australia. When I lived there, it was just a busy little town, and now it is just a busy big town. A lot has changed and yet stayed the same. It is about 85 kilometres from the state's capital, Sydney, or as we called it back then, the Big Smoke. We used to only ever go to the city when it was absolutely necessary. I could count the number of childhood trips on one hand. It was a big deal to travel that far, but now people commute from Gosford to Sydney daily to work. The world has become smaller. My mum almost called me June. Thank God she didn't. June is an old woman's name, and I think I would have struggled with it back then. Maybe not so much now. June sounds like a pretty name to me and symbolic of my birth month. I would like it now. Instead, Mum decided upon Angela. Why? I don't know. I never asked. I should have. I don't know a lot about Mum and Dad's story. As a child, I was not curious. Well, at least not about that. The truth was that they were just always there, every day, and I believe that would never change. What I didn't know could wait, because I had forever. Robert Cinders, my father, worked at a place that left him arriving home tired, with dirt under his fingernails. Despite the physical strain, he was a robust man, funny as hell, and possessed a gentle and kind nature. Linda Cinders, my mother, was a stay-at-home mum. She had a short and slim stature, and she was even funnier than my dad. She had a heart full of love, a mind full of rebellion, and didn't know what it was like to be unhappy. I never heard or saw them fight. Some days there would be a few hours of awkward silence, maybe a little tension in the air, but those days were rare. Very rare. Sometimes I even think I may have made up those awkward hours just so they weren't too perfect. Looking back, I think they not only loved each other, but were in love with each other, and I was the sole recipient of their adoration and attention as their only child. I was so lucky. I was also a very typical Australian child of the 70s. There was no such thing as germs, stranger danger, and ADHD. I mean, I'm sure there was. But germs were good for you. Strangers didn't live in our suburb, and ADHD was simply called rambunctious. We had shag carpeting, avocado-coloured appliances, and battles for control of the TV remote, which only had 4 buttons, yet you needed 2 hands to hold it. Kids played on the street, left home after breakfast, and didn't return until the streetlights came on. I also distinctly remember loving my pet rock like it was my own child. I never quite hated school, but my report cards made it seem like I was in a long-term relationship with procrastination. My grades were consistently decent, yet my teachers insisted on leaving the same message. Angela needs to apply herself more. It was like they were stuck in a Groundhog Day loop of disappointment, and I was just there for the popcorn. They saw potential in me, I saw potential in finding new ways to avoid homework. It was a match made in educational purgatory. In our house, music flowed like tap water. The radio was the unofficial family DJ, working overtime even when it needed a break. And when the radio dared to take a breather, my mum stepped in like a one-woman jukebox. She would belt out tunes, a medley of strange childhood melodies and contemporary hits, like a musical time traveller with questionable lyrics. Her version was a lyrical roller coaster, where the words took unexpected detours, but her pitch, impeccable. It was like living in a karaoke universe where even mundane chores got a dramatic soundtrack. I'd find myself humming along, and that constant need to sing stayed with me. I was the family's music aficionado, with ears finely tuned like a concert pianist, and a rhythm that made even a metronome jealous. I had this uncanny ability to remember lyrics like a soundhound, only without the app. Mum would sing, and I'd be there, ready to correct the lyrical road bumps with a stern look of love. It was a musical collaboration, a duet of her talent and my pragmatic love of words. My mum provided the entertainment, and I, the silent lyrical editor. Together, we created a harmonious backbeat that turned mundane chores into a Broadway-worthy production. Who needs a choreographer when you have a mum who turns dishwashing into a dance number? In a nutshell, my childhood was happy and uneventful. I never felt poor despite our lack of money, never felt lonely despite no siblings, and thought that laughter was the stable in every child's life. Dull for you to read, but I wanted to share it so you don't blame my actions on the two people who raised me. None of my choices are their fault. They had no control of what I did. Why? Well, that is about to become more apparent. Let's fast forward to when I was 15. This is where things start to get more interesting. I was in school, biology with Mr. King. I looked like something out of the Brady Bunch. Blonde, bell-bottoms and boobs. I was scribbling band names on my workbook. I want to say it was AC/DC to stay on brand, but I think it was probably sherbet or something similar. Anyway, Mr. King was talking about making babies, the DNA side, not the bumping uglies bit. Nevertheless, I was thinking about how gross that sounded. Babies were a foreign concept. I mean, at that time my idea of responsibility was remembering to feed my goldfish. Some woman with a serious expression came into the room. I remember wondering who she was. I don't think I had ever seen her before. She whispered something into the teacher's ear, starting a long and quiet conversation that brought the entire room to a sudden standstill. The typical hum of student conversation stopped, replaced by a profound silence, as everyone became fascinated by the mysterious exchange. When she finally stopped, Mr. King looked like he had been punched in the guts, and he looked straight at me. I remember thinking, this cannot be good. The anguish in his eyes drilled straight into the chambers of my heart. The weight of his stare, a silent but sure messenger of grief. I will never forget that look. I remember nothing of that day before that moment, and nothing of that day after that moment. But I will never forget the way Mr. King looked at me. His look changed my life. That day changed my life. That was the day that I would be forever known as that poor orphan girl. My parents were killed in a car accident and my life was never the same. Sorry to be so abrupt, but it is what it is. And even now I don't like to talk about it. So let's move on. 1980. Dust in the wind. The 80s found Mr. and Mrs. Cinder dead and their only child apparently old enough to look after herself. The law said, at the age of 15 years and 9 months, I didn't need a guardian. Why? I was within 90 days of being 16 years of age, and in Australia, at the tender age of 16, I was legally responsible. Individuals aged 16 and over may be held legally responsible for their actions, including criminal offences, but they may still be subject to certain protections as minors. The law said that I could leave school, give medical consent, be employed and obtain a learner's driver's licence, so by proxy, I didn't need any parental guidance at all. Yeah, right. I was a fucking child. No parents, no rules. It's a teenager's dream, right? I think, at the time, I masked my pain with that whole idea of freedom. The thought now of a teenager having no rules seems abhorrent to me, but when I was that 16-year-old, I thought I was old enough to make adult decisions, and I was pretty all right at it. I decided to buy a place of my very own with my inheritance. Now, my inheritance was basically selling off whatever my parents owned and taking the money. It was enough to set myself up in a modest, small, tiny, room called an apartment on Oxford Street in Sydney. In the 80s, it was starting to get a reputation as a gay hotspot, but I never actually saw it that way. Decriminalisation of homosexuality was only very new, and prejudice was still rife, so openly gay was not really a thing back then. Plus, sure, I was naive. But to be fair, you try picking the gay guy out of a crowd filled with makeup-wearing, hair-teasing, spandex-loving, stud-covered pretty boys. Christ, even Boy George didn't seem gay back then. Anyway, back to me. My day job was welfare payments, and I had managed to create a nice-ish home for myself. Friends came easy, especially when you had a parentless crash pad, and I embraced my new life away from the painful memories of my happy childhood in Gosford. I strutted down the fluorescent-lit streets of Sydney, my hair teased to the heavens and my homemade patchwork jacket shimmering in the disco lights. I was determined to make it big as a rock star, and nothing was going to stand in my way. Well, except maybe my lack of musical talent. Armed with a cheap electric guitar I bought from a pawn store and a whole lot of misplaced confidence and attitude, I auditioned for every band in town. Unfortunately, and what I didn't really know, my guitar playing sounded more like a cat being strangled than a smooth riff. But did that stop me? Absolutely not. Undeterred, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I recruited a motley crew of misfits from the local dive bar, a drummer who could barely keep a beat, a bassist who only knew 2 chords. No, wait, make that 2 notes, not 2 chords, a singer, because I liked her hairstyle, and a keyboardist who insisted on wearing sunglasses indoors. Also, if I can go off track for a second, you may be wondering how a 15-year-old got into that dive bar in the first place, when the legal drinking age in Australia is 18. Here is another great, not great thing about the 80s. There were no photo IDs back then. Proof of age came in the form of a middle-aged bouncer, security, barman, cleaner, who basically looked you up and down, figured you were probably old enough, and motioned for you to enter. If you got a bouncer to security, barman to cleaner who was serious about his role of age enforcement, you could just flash him some form of ID, didn't have to be your own, but remember to do the date of birth maths in your head first, and you were in. When I say any form of ID, I mean it. I once got into a nightclub with an old man's expired fishing licence. Good times. Back to my DIY rock band. We called ourselves the Neon Unicorns because, well, why not? We practised in the drummer's girlfriend's mum's garage, much to her dismay. She'd bang on the door, yelling about the noise and threatening to call the cops. But we were on a mission, and no amount of parental interference was going to stop us. We played only 1 gig, at some pub smaller than your lounge room, but to us seemed the big time. The crowd was a mix of staff, local drunks and teenage runaways. But when we hit the stage, something magical happened. Maybe it was the glittery eyeshadow or the sheer audacity of our performance, which was described as spirited. At the time I thought was a compliment, but now realise it meant talentless, but enthusiastic. But we had the crowd eating out of the palms of our hands. Looking back, I think it was more because of pity than anything else. Sure, our cover songs were terrible, and our stage presence was more awkward than awesome, but for that one glorious night, we were rock stars, and it was enough to kickstart my fame-hungry pursuit. The Neon Unicorns broke up the following day. The drummer, feeling that fame and groupies was right around the corner, broke up with his girlfriend and we lost our rehearsal space. The singer moved interstate with her new boyfriend, and the sunglass-wearing keyboardist quit because he got his dream job, working in a video store. But hey, who needs a band when you've got 0 musical talent, impressive looks and a dream, right? I pressed on. My second band was when fame finally found me, but I had to take care of a few things first. 1984. Stairway to Heaven. I'm going to skip the part where I actually learnt to play guitar. That's boring. Actually, no. I'm going to tell you, it was a hard slog, and I don't want you to think I just magically formed skills and became a virtuoso. Being a successful musician in the early 80s was hard. The only thing going viral was the common cold, and the closest thing to a blind audition was trying to play guitar in the dark. Learning to play the guitar was like embarking on a quest with a map that was just a poorly drawn doodle. No YouTube tutorials to guide you, no online forums to cry for help, just you, your guitar, and the occasional motivational pep talk from the posters on your wall. The internet was still a futuristic dream, and status updates were written on the toilet walls. In this analog wilderness, I had to conquer the strings with actual physical contact. After all, who needs the internet when you have the timeless charm of cassette tapes and the satisfaction of saying, "I learned this from a VHS tutorial, not an online masterclass." It was a journey filled with sore fingers, tangled guitar strings, and more off-key notes than a choir of tone-deaf canaries. Just me, my second-hand guitar, and the sweet sound of progress, sprinkled with the not-so-sweet sound of wrong notes, swearing, and tears of frustration. So, while others may have been out there chasing fame and fortune, I was alone, in my bedroom, honing my craft one off-key strum at a time. And you know what? That's how the real legends were born. Okay, I wasn't actually one of them. But in a time when showing off was the everyday, if you wanted to stand out, you had to do it the old-fashioned way, with a killer guitar riff, not by crafting the perfect hashtag. It took me a few years, but I became a great lead guitarist, or, as I often heard at the time, pretty good for a girl. With my guitar skills sorted, I needed two more things: a cool name and a cool look. Angela Cinders was just not rock and roll enough. I needed something cooler, more 80s, and less me. Then, in a drunken moment of genius, I took a few letters off my legal name and came up with the perfect stage name. I wrote it on the back of a pizza box, cliché much, and once my eyes saw it, I declared myself to be Angel Sins. See what I did there? Cool name check. Now for the cool look. The look I wanted was spandex, silver dinner jackets, silk scarves, and red velvet boots. Simple enough, but two things stood in my way: money and location. Australia wasn't exactly the epicenter for hairband fashion, and even if it was, I couldn't afford anything that resembled awesome. So I went with a more budget-pleasing look of tight-ripped denim jeans, unbuttoned white dress shirt, black bra, and a black cowboy hat. It worked, and it was sexy. No one seemed to notice that I never wore anything different. It was my accidental signature style, and thus Angel Sins was born. Angel Sins found herself in a nightclub, rolling her eyes and looking bored as Madonna lookalikes flooded the dance floor to walk on the spot with arms widely swaying left to right. They all wanted to be like a virgin touched for the very first time. Angel Sins was thinking this was not my crowd. True, they were not my crowd, but I did like being there. Despite looking bored, I was having an okay time. It felt cool to not fit in, rebellious and unique. I felt self-righteous not being one of the Madonna sheep. In reality, I was a hard rock sheep, but to me that was still elevated. Now, to quote a cliché, across the smoke-filled room, because you could smoke inside back then, our eyes met. His name was Ricky Rebel. Not his real name, but I was sworn to secrecy, and I will keep that blood oath. He saw me and nodded. I nodded back. It was like we could feel each other's disco pain. He was one of my kind, and we had found each other, in a nightclub of all places. We started talking, and by the time Cyndi Lauper was telling everyone how girls just want to have fun, we were rock solid. As simple as that, I found my way into my next band, 1985. And please welcome to the stage, Angel Rain. Yeah, I know, not very original naming a band after myself, but the 80s we like that. Bon Jovi, Van Halen, Dio, Winger, Slaughter, Keel, Lynch Mob, Dokken, even Guns N' Roses, whose early influences were Tracy I. Guns and Axl Rose. So, I rest my case, Your Honour. Here's the story of Angel Rain. Chapter 1. The Birth of My Band. It was the beginning of 1985. I found myself knee-deep in ambition, surrounded by amps and drum kits in a dingy garage on the outskirts of town. It was not the rock star dream I had envisioned, but at least I had a band. Ricky and I left that nightclub and struck up a do-you-play-anything conversation. He knew a drummer. That drummer's ex-girlfriend's brother had a guitar. That guitarist went to school with this dude. And so on and so forth. Until the next thing you know, voila, you have a band. Let me introduce you. Ricky Rebel, aka the nightclub guy. A flamboyant singer with a voice that could shatter glass. He strutted around like a peacock in faux leather pants. A 6'2" body packed full of ego, sex drive, and God-given talent. He had a killer smile and long, straight black hair. A perfect combo for a frontman. He needed to be half-pissed to sing at his best, so naturally we kept him lubricated fairly well at all times. I'm also pretty sure we contributed to his alcoholism. Blaze Beats, Acre Simon Matheson. With his wild bleach blonde hair and even wilder drumming skills, looked like he'd been born with sticks in his hands. In fact, I don't think I ever saw him not holding a pair. He would spin them between his fingers and tap relentlessly on any surface that remained stationary long enough for him to make noise on. He was shy, beautiful, and I never saw him with a girl, despite legions of them following him from venue to venue. Robert Jones, aka Robert Jones. He was not into stage names, classically trained and well-educated. His face always looked like he was disappointed with life. He would sit quietly, plucking away at his bass guitar, laying down a groove that could make the devil dance. He never drank, rarely spoke, but on stage he would pump and grind like a wild animal, unleashing a torrent of energy that electrified the crowd and left jaws on the floor. And then there was Ace Fury, aka Adrian Fuller, aka the Perpetual Joker. He had very little talent, but could be relied on to lift any mood. He kept Ricky's ego in check and even managed to get a smile out of Robert, once. He would strum his guitar in time, forget only some of the chords, and charmed the pants of many a front-row beauty queen. He was never serious. He looked older than us, but had more energy and better hangover cures than anyone I've known. He was the steady force we needed, and I never gave him credit for that. Ricky was a skilled songwriter. It was like he had a subconscious vault of melodies. The guys in the band picked up what he was putting down very quickly. They all brought their own touches to the music, but Ricky was predominantly responsible for most of the songwriting. Music was his thing, words were not. That is where I came in. I have no idea why, but when I heard the song, I could hear the words for it. Thanks, Mum. Ricky would say, bam, bam, bom, bom, douche. And I would reply, you can try to run, but you can't hide from her love on the dangerous side. Yeah, all right, it wasn't exactly Shakespeare, but again, it was the 80s, and when you are competing with lyrics like Wake Me Up Before You Go, Go. I was considered a literary genius. We learnt a decent catalogue of cover songs to get the gigs, and once on stage we would weave a few of our own songs in. We were very good, not great, but for better or worse, we were Angel Rain. Chapter 2. The Rise to Fame. As we embarked on our journey to rock and roll stardom, we soon discovered that being a rock star was more than just a hairstyle. We had our fair share of gigs at shitholes and seedy clubs. We played to empty rooms and in different crowds. But it seemed to just egg us on. The less interested people were, the harder we tried. Plus, we were becoming pretty rad at what we were doing. You hear about battles with record labels and trying to get signed. That wasn't even on our radar. I guess we didn't aim high enough. We were just happy to get people dancing and thrilled with never having to buy drinks. We never had a personality clash within the band. We got irritated and we gossiped about each other, but overall, we were a sweet-ass team. I think because we were all so different, it worked out. Noon was competing for the same turf, plus we didn't truly care. By that I mean we all weren't on this do-or-die mission to conquer the world. We were all just happy being able to play, and we, stupidly, thought that all the fame and glory would come when we were magically discovered. I really think that bands with conflict are bands that care too much. If everything you are and everything you want and everything you need relies on a group of musicians being professional, focused and driven, well, you are bound to start throwing punches at some point. Chapter 3. Making it. Against all odds, Angel Rain became a worldwide success. The fact that you have never heard of Angel Rain would indicate I am obviously only kidding, but we did become what I would call local famous. What's local famous? As the name would suggest, it's when you become famous, locally. I would say we had about a 200-kilometre radius covered. We basically toured the local suburbs and sold out every show we did. We even had groupies. A small collection of young women who went from gig to gig to gig and carried on like love-struck schoolgirls, not that I could judge or complain. I had my own groupies. Well, okay, groupie. Single, not plural. I think it was just one guy who was a fan. He never spoke to me, and he was always surrounded by a large group of friends, which I didn't mind, as long as they all paid for their tickets. I was a little jealous of the female groupies, to be honest. At least they fed the boys' ego, bought them drinks and, satisfied them? My groupie stood at the back of the room and enjoyed the music. How dare he, right? Between the crowds and smoke and me whipping my hair around, I couldn't even tell if he was good-looking or not. But he wore a homemade Angel Sins t-shirt and never missed a show. It was cute. Plus, I was even lucky to have a groupie, if I'm honest. Back then, worshipping a female musician probably wasn't as cool as it is now. Unless, of course, that female musician had a giant pair of boobs and splashed about in the pool singing about a good time. I was a young woman in a man's world, playing a young man's music. Pioneer, that's too strong of a word. I was no Memphis Minnie, but I was unique and I was a threat. Anyway, back to Angel Rain. We had a hit song, the one I mentioned earlier, Jailbait. It was played at the end of every show and the crowd would go off. It is the best feeling ever to have a crowd sing your song. It is validation, belonging, connection, energy. Like a meeting of souls sharing the same heartbeat. It's love. Again, I am sounding a bit cliché, right? You know, for someone who just bragged about being excellent with words, I'm not explaining myself very well. But it's hard to explain unless you have experienced it. I have, and it's profound, let's leave it at that. Jailbait could have been huge. We were asked to change the title and lyrics by a few would-be managers, but we wanted to keep our integrity and refused. Seemed like a righteous move at the time, but now I can't help ask myself, what the fuck kind of integrity is it to stand by a song about underage sex? We had another big hit called Hard as Steel that even made it to local radio, but it was never what Jailbait was. I remember crossing the road and having people hang out of cars and yell Jailbait at me. I would raise my arms and fist pump the air. They would scream in approval. God, I was an idiot. Angel Rain was finally going places. As long as that place was within a 200-kilometre radius, of course, but we were going places. Local famous was satisfying enough for me. It felt like local famous today, world famous tomorrow, and I was naively ready for the ride. 1990. Eye of the Tiger. 1990. That was the year that I met him. Oh, let me tell you, he was beautiful. He looked like some kind of rock god. Long feathered brown hair, dark eyes, tall and built like a brick shithouse, to use a crude Australian vernacular. He walked with the arrogance of a person that had been gorgeous his whole life and never had to explain anything. Ever, you know the type. He could have had any woman in any club, and probably did. He wasn't at all intelligent, not particularly charming, if I'm honest, but to stand near him was to be in the presence of the extraordinary, a genetic lottery winner or some such thing. And come on, who doesn't love to be in the presence of the extraordinary, right? I was standing at the bar of a nightclub, dressed in a tight white dress, white high heels, and a pearl necklace. Are you picturing some little old lady in a white smock with her good pearls on? And who wears white heels anymore? Remember, I am talking about the 80s. Stay with me. I looked amazing, like I had come straight from a Whitesnake video. You don't believe me? Google Tawny Kiten is this love video if you want a visual. Anyway, he walked up and stood beside me and without even looking at me said, "Take me home now." It was a weird pickup line, but it worked. Self-assured, to the point, sexually confident, but not sleazy. I liked it, and I went with it. I took him to my place and, well, you know, it was the 80s. Come on. Now, when most people are telling their life story, they will change people's names, you know, to protect the innocent and dodge legal action, etc., etc. So I'm going to do the same. Let's just say his name was, let me think. Asshat. From now on, I will refer to him as Asshat. The classic one-night stand turned into him basically never leaving. Angel and her asshat was born. I'm sorry, but I am going to sound totally pretentious and shallow now, but we made a stunning couple. We were picture perfect. Like two of the greatest examples of human perfection had found each other, fell in love, created a godlike union, and now walked the earth so that mere mortals could be impressed and intimidated by us. What? I warned you. I was going to sound pretentious and shallow, so don't give me that look. We were young, gorgeous, and in love. We looked sickeningly great together. Asshat and I had a tumultuous relationship. Back then we called it on and off again, but nowadays it would be a codependent toxicity. I was a young woman in a man's world, trying to juggle my local fame with his insane jealousy. He was angry when drunk and tedious when sober. I was soft-hearted and forgiving, yet headstrong and determined. I loved him so much I hated him. He hated me so much he loved me. It was a messy 2 years. Only 2 years. Geez, why am I even mentioning him then? Keep reading, you'll find out. Oh, and before I forget, turns out Asshat's awesome pickup line was a mistake. He was so drunk he had mistaken me for his pregnant wife. Yeah, I know, so much to unpack. I didn't look pregnant, but apparently she was wearing an oversized white singlet dress, hiding the baby bump, and from behind we looked similar. Blah blah anyway, they were on a break. Asshat was drunk, she was sober, and he needed a ride home. So, he just walked up to the bar, he thought she was standing at, and demanded a ride. As fate would have it, she unfortunately lost the baby a few weeks later. Asshat said it was God saving him from her shit. Classic Asshat. Typically simplistic, always self-centered, and as supportive as tissue paper in a rainstorm. At least he was consistent. 1991. Another one bites the dust. This is where we say goodbye to Angel Rain. There was no fight, no breakup, no decision to end. It was just like one day Angel Rain simply ceased being. Overnight, it seemed as though the appeal of the 80s disappeared into thin air. You can blame grunge, with its raw and gritty anti-hairspray platform, though some might argue it was more anti-shampoo platform, or blame the Pokies for diverted attention and disposable income away from live music venues. Some even say the 80s died a natural death from the saturation of carbon copy bands, each duplicate trying to replicate the formula of success, but instead diluting its authenticity and originality. For Angel Rain, maybe it was the shrinking crowds, shrinking bank balances, and shrinking egos. Who really knows? I simply believe it was time. The decade was over. Anyway, regardless of the reasons behind its decline, one thing was obvious. The 80s were done. So what become of our favourite rockers? Angel Sins packed away her guitar, got a real job, and focused on becoming the best damn girlfriend she could, supporting her gorgeous yet vacuous man to follow his dream of sleeping with everything with a pulse and tits, while she did overtime to pay the bills and buy him more haircare products than Rapunzel would need. More about her tragic tale later. Ace Fury became Adrian Fuller, a salesman in a local furniture store. He had a nice house, a nice wife, nice kids, and died of cancer a year after he became sales manager. His wife remarried, and her new husband doesn't make her laugh, but he is great with the kids. Last I heard, she was pregnant with his child. Blaze Beats went from pounding the skins to chasing enlightenment in Thailand. He is now known as Samsara Arya. His Insta page features serene sunsets, mindful moments, and the occasional remix of chanting monks. He is still beautiful and still single. In the last post I read, he was studying the ancient art of Vipassana meditation. I know. From Beats to Buddha. Robert Jones, aka Robert Jones, became a professional fortune cookie writer, crafting witty and inspiring fortunes to bring a smile to people's faces after their meal. Okay, that's a lie. I don't know what become of Rob. He sold his bass guitar and he moved to Western Australia. He has no socials and didn't say goodbye. Hey, he could be a professional fortune cookie writer for all I know, but I imagine he has everything he ever wanted and still wears that same face of disappointment. The last time I saw Ricky Rebel, I was sitting at a red light in my car with my daughter. Ricky was crossing the road and didn't see me. It must have been in the early 2000s. He still had that same walk, just like a frontman should. He was older, of course, but dressed like he did in the 80s. Tight latex pants and studded boots, a black shirt and a white cowboy hat with a skull on the front. More jewellery than I care to explain, and his long black hair was washed out with greys. Slightly ridiculous looking, if I am being honest. It was summer, and he was overdressed. At first I felt a huge sense of pride. Good on him for not selling out, not giving a damn and dressing however the hell he wanted. More power to him. If anything, I was jealous of his confidence. Jealous that he never let go. He was who he was, and I loved that. But as I watched him walk with his false bravado and thin frame, the sweat on his brow from wearing latex in summer and the way he avoided eye contact, as if he was trying not to see the judgment, I felt sorry for him. Stuck in the past, refusing to let go of something that no longer exists. Empty, forgotten, trapped. I don't know. It was 15 seconds and I can't judge his whole life by that, but I felt slightly sad. Also, let's remember, it is easy for me to question his life, but what if he had seen me? What would he have thought? How would he have felt about me? In my sensible car, with a young child, plump thighs and dressed like I raided a clothing bargain bin, maybe he would have seen what I had become and felt sorry for me. Was I empty? Forgotten? Trapped? Which of us was better off? I had no clue, and I have no desire to find out. We are who we are. I just hope he was happy, and if he was, then I hold no judgment as to what that looks like to him. That goes for all of my band members. I wish them all well. Rippy Ace. The truth is, I don't know who they are now. I didn't truly know who they were then either. We shared a moment in time, a dream that never quite came true. We got a taste of greatness, but never savoured the full feast. We created music and made memories, and now that's all that remains. I am thankful for each of them, and I am thankful for Angel Rain. 93. Sweet child o' mine. As I stood there, 28 years old and 9 months pregnant, I couldn't help but feel like a heavily inflated balloon about to pop at any given moment. Asshat had left me literally the minute he found out I was pregnant, and I mean literally that minute. So by the time I felt the first contraction, I was very much used to being alone. I did struggle with whether to keep the baby or not. It wasn't planned, and God knows given the choice I would not have chosen a brain-dead Adonis as the father. But as my mind jumped between ruining my life and celebrating creation, I settled on this one feeling I had somewhere deep in my chest. A tiny orb of purity filled with boundless, intense love. Once I focused on that, the choice was made for me. I was having a baby, and to be honest, I was glad he wouldn't be around. I had a 50-50 shot my baby wouldn't inherit his special brand of intelligence, plus I had found that not having to explain him was a soothing tonic for my broken heart. But let me tell you, there's nothing like the thrill of feeling your water break in the middle of a shopping centre. Suddenly I went from satisfying a craving for French fries to realising I was a walking biohazard in a public place. "Clean up in the food court!" I wanted to shout, but I was too busy trying not to hyperventilate. Next thing I knew, I was being driven to the hospital by a woman I had never met but seemed to be a rally driver in a past life. Meanwhile, I was clutching onto the oh shit handle for dear life, alternating between deep breathing and prayers that we wouldn't hit any potholes. We arrived and stumbled into the chaos. It was like being thrust into the middle of a melodramatic soap opera. Nurses were zipping around like headless chickens, and I swear I could hear the theme song of I Didn't Sign Up for This, the Labour edition, playing in the background of my life sitcom. Finally settled into a delivery room, I was dressed in what I can only describe as a hospital-grade muumuu and instructed to assume the position. All modesty went out the window faster than you can say epidural, and suddenly there I was, spread eagle with an audience of medical professionals waiting for a small human to erupt from my vagina. As the contractions hit with the force of 1,000 freight trains, I found myself channeling my inner warrior goddess. Forget LeMay's breathing techniques, I was growling like a feral animal under attack. And then, amidst the shit, literally, and primal screams, my little bundle of blood covered, vernix-soaked joy made her grand entrance into the world. The relief I felt was indescribable, though I'm pretty sure I left permanent nail imprints in one of the nurse's hands. Sorry about that. As I held my newborn for the first time, all the pain and chaos of childbirth melted away. Imagine cradling a piece of your own heart, fresh from the kiln of life. It's as if the universe had handed you a bundle of stardust wrapped in the softest clouds, and each breath held painted a masterpiece of possibility. She looked like a tiny, wrinkled philosopher who just finished a long session of contemplating while submerged in a hot tub. Her squished-up face, wispy hair, and adorably oversized eyes that did a blink-blink, where am I dance, as she looked around the room. She was perfection. Then she looked up at me. We connected, and in her eyes I knew two things for certain. One, I would never, ever love anything in my life more than I loved this baby girl. And two, I could tell straight away she was already smarter than her father. 1998. Living on a prayer. The first few years of motherhood were bloody awful. I loathed every minute of it. The constant crying, refusal to eat, and epic tantrums. And that was just from me. Olivia was twice as bad. Oh, and the lack of sleep. You know, sleep deprivation is a form of torture in some countries. It's ridiculous. Most of the time I was just stumbling around like an exhausted zombie. After I finally managed to put my Olivia back to sleep, I would collapse into bed with the grace of a sack of potatoes, wondering if this is what they meant by the miracle of life. And 36 seconds later she would start again. The experts say stupid shit like, "Mummy sleeps when baby sleeps." Oh, really? A couple of things. 1. When baby is sleeping is the only time you can get anything done. I don't mean get your hair done. God, for 2 years I don't think I even picked up a hairbrush. I mean things like eating instead of snacking, wash clothes stiffened by layers of baby puke, or scrub that mystery stain on the carpet. 2. In Olivia's case, the only time she snoozed for more than 20 minutes straight was during a car ride I was chauffeuring, and I didn't think that was the best time to match baby's sleep patterns. I love my daughter to bits, but she was an asshole, and she was out to get me. To this very day, I hate grocery shopping. It sends chills through me. I think I still have PTSD from shopping with a baby. Navigating the aisles of the grocery store with a newborn in tow is nothing short of Armageddon. Every step feels like a delicate balancing act between managing my shopping list, attending to my baby's needs, and trying to maintain a semblance of a normal human being. As I carefully manoeuvred through the crowded store, I couldn't help but feel the weight of judgmental stares from other shoppers. Their sympathetic glances only served to heighten my awareness of how daunting this task truly was. With every coo or whimper from Olivia, my heart raced, dreading the possibility of a full-blown meltdown in the middle of the cereal aisle. The logistical nightmare of juggling a baby bag the size of a small motor vehicle, a pram with its own agenda and grocery basket, not big enough to hold half the stuff on my list, was enough to make even the most organised parent break a sweat. And just when I thought I had everything under control, Olivia would decide it's the perfect time for a fecal blowout, filling her nappy with a pile of diarrheic shit bigger than she was. How is that even physically possible? And she did that every single time I had to shop. And I mean, Every single time. Despite my best efforts to stay composed, there are moments of sheer frustration and exhaustion. The constant struggle to keep both myself and my baby calm amidst the chaos takes its toll, leaving me feeling drained both mentally and emotionally by the time I reach the checkout line. Despite the overwhelming nature of the task, I would always press on, fueled by a steadfast commitment to providing for our needs, and because, well, let's face it, I had no fucking choice. I honestly don't know how I got through it. It was a dark time in my life, which sounds odd considering I was a mummy to a beautiful, healthy little girl. But trying to keep a tiny human alive is a logistical nightmare, physical torture, and an emotional beating. I remember I just wanted it all to end. I wanted to end it all. Of course I didn't. I think we all entertain those kinds of thoughts at some point, maybe only for a second, maybe only in the worst of times, or for some maybe it's a constant battle. For me it was just the tiredness talking. I read once that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I like that. Time heals all wounds, they say. Not sure if I believe that, but I do believe that with each passing moment, we gain strength, resilience, and a deeper understanding of ourselves. Eventually, and with enough moments under your belt, you have the power to find beauty everywhere, even in the broken pieces. 2004. Never tear us apart. By the time Olivia was in school, we were a killer team. We both were getting decent sleep, that was a good start, but we also had formed a nice little friendship. I understood what it meant to be a mother a lot more than I did in those first few years, and we found our rhythm. I realised that motherhood was about nurturing, forgiveness, guidance, and unconditional love. I gave that to Olivia, but more importantly, I gave it to myself. Motherhood is about sacrifice, selflessness, and being a good role model, despite wanting to hang out the car window and yell abuse at the dickhead in the Volvo. It's about explaining the concept of privacy while a toddler watches you sit on the toilet doing a number 2, and it is about doing 7 things at once. I never felt like I had mastered it. You never really do, but at least I was no longer in a place of loathing. Plus, my daughter went from being a pissing, shitting, screaming lump of constant demands to a little person. That helped a lot. She had her own personality, complete with quirks, flaws, and a perspective on the world. Her eyes would light up when she saw me. She thought I was funny and smart and beautiful. We played dress-up. We had dinner dates together. She would read me bedtime stories, and I taught her to play mini-golf. She pushed her luck, tested her boundaries, and she knew how to press my buttons. I didn't care. I loved every minute of it because I loved every minute of her. The subject of asshat would come up now and then. She would ask about her father, and I would tell her kind of what happened. I made excuses for him, told her he was young and not ready to be a daddy. Sugarcoated the whole thing, not to defend him but more to protect her. The truth was too nasty. He said he didn't want her. He said she would be a burden, a pain in the arse. He blamed the end of what we were on her. He was right. It's true, he didn't want her. And yes, she is my burden sometimes, and even a pain in the arse occasionally. And she was the end of what Asshat and I were, not because of who she was, but more from what she represented. So he was right, and yet he was so wrong. What Asshat didn't know and still doesn't know is what she has become. He doesn't know how she fills the world with love, how she can make you snort with laughter one minute and solve the world's problems the next. He doesn't know her kindness to others, her love of animals and hatred of bullies. She defends those who cannot defend themselves and seeks the best from herself without resorting to putting others down. That baby he didn't want to know has become the woman he doesn't deserve to know. Wondering what happened to him? Okay, I'll tell you. You are going to love this. He never lost his good looks, unfortunately. I kind of hoped he would. He just looks like an older, more distinguished version of himself. Annoyingly, looking even better with age, if you can believe that. He has a young, gorgeous fiancée, and they seem happy, constantly gushing about their love on their socials. Between declarations of devotion, There are hundreds of photos of the varied and interesting ways they are spending his money. Oh yeah, that's right, he is crazy rich as well as crazy handsome. But Angela, how does such a dim-witted pretty boy like Asshat become so rich? Well, I think it had something to do with the Microsoft stock options he was given by a family member in the mid-80s, which just so happened to be worth $1 gazillion by the mid-90s. Wow, what an incredibly fortunate turn of events. I'm absolutely not feeling any bitterness at all, whatsoever. And you know that's sarcasm, hey? I check his socials every few years, because that's about how long each fiancé seems to last. His love life is a production line of beautiful blondes with exponentially decreasing sized bikinis. He gets older, they get younger. You know the drill. You would think this would bother me, but I often ask myself, is he actually happy? Is he truly happy with his life? Like sincerely happy? You know what, he probably is absolutely without a doubt totally happy. Let's face it, he has the emotional depth of a jellyfish. He thinks with his dick, because it's bigger than his brain. And he loves blondes and loves having what others want. He is rich, handsome, and has never felt a saggy breast, or I suspect a natural one, in his life. Okay, who am I kidding? He is happy as a pig in mud. Fuck you, Karma. Step up your game. 2008. No quarter. Social media, love it or hate it. But it changed my life for the better. For someone who grew up without much technology, the fact that I could connect with everyone from old schoolmates to famous rock stars was a real head-turner for me. And for a parent isolated in her single mother's hell, the connection to the world was a sanity saviour. I was hesitant at first. It all started with a lot of peer pressure and a simple click of the mouse. Profile created. Suddenly, I found myself part this crazy, vast digital community. I lurked in the shadows, observing conversations and silently admiring the creativity of others. But soon enough I mustered the courage to engage. Through social media, I discovered a world of like-minded people, passionate about the same interests as me. Whether it was a love for lyrics, a fascination with photography, or a knack for cooking, there was a group for everyone. I sound like some wide-eyed Neanderthal discovering fire, but back in the early 2000s it was pretty much like that. New and exciting with endless possibilities. Today we have things like influencers, cyberbullies and fake news. I can't say I love what social media has become today, but back in its early stages it was more of a pure form of connection, rather than his narcissistic money-making falsity. I remember having a MySpace page for a while, but it wasn't until Facebook started to become dominate that thing really got interesting. One of the first things I did was search for Angel Rain. I found one reference to the band in an 80s tragic one-hit wonders chat, and that was it. The ego in me wanted to turn that around and sing our praises, but I still had some form of embarrassment that never left me and I could not go there. Plus, in the early 2000s, the whole retro mania thing was starting to take off, and I didn't want to look like I was trying to cash in on it. You know, like writing a shameless 80s theme memoir or something stupid like that. The thought of a has-been comeback tour left me cold. Ugh, no thanks. Plus, there was no getting the band back together. One was dead, one was a monk, one was MIA, one never left the decade, and finally one was happy being a mum and not having to prove herself as cool anymore. I didn't want the past, I wanted the future. Angela Cinders has a clean internet presence, a clean, wholesome, non-embarrassing, online digital life involving mummy blogs, cooking groups, and cat memes. Okay, I do follow just about every 80s band in existence, and I can't help but crash a few nostalgia chats, but overall, Angela Cinders is an internet nobody, and Angel Sins is relegated to the whatever happened to bin where she belongs. Olivia is what is known as a millennial. Her online presence is a one long, never-ending stream of consciousness, which I hate. Nothing is private, nothing is sacred, nothing is personal. It unnerves me how this younger generation is so okay with strangers, knowing everything they do, say, think and feel. Back in my day, it was called having a stalker. Now everyone under 30 has about 10,000 stalkers. They just call them followers. Wow, listen to me, but back in my day, that makes me sound so old. I suppose my point being that I'm glad I never fully told Olivia about my past life. She knows I lived through the 80s, obviously. I was young, I had no parents, and I was into rock music. Beyond that is all speculation and imagination. If she knew her mother was Angel Sins, I think one of two things would happen. Either she would completely lose respect and authority for me, or she would create some sort of jailbait tribute page that would make me go viral for all the wrong reasons. Either way, my secret is safe. During the early 2000s phase of my life, things were pretty smooth sailing. Olivia had just started high school. She was this bright, kind-hearted kid with a solid bunch of friends around her. As for me, well, my life was what you might call pleasantly uneventful. I had a job that fit perfectly around school hours, letting me be there for Olivia whenever she needed. And yeah, I had a couple of boyfriends, but nothing that screamed serious commitment. I had my own circle of friends, a job that paid the bills, and honestly, I was content with how things were chugging along. It was one of those times where boring was actually a pretty nice place to be. 2011. Welcome to my nightmare. Olivia announces she is in love and wants to get married. She was 18 years old. As a parent, this is certainly not the worst thing that can happen to your child, but if you have children, you will understand it is something that can fill you with dread. After weeks of Olivia going on about Mark did this and Mark said that and Mark thinks and Mark wants that, I decided I had better meet the boy. It was a worry about why I had not met him sooner, to be honest. Either Mark didn't want to, which means he might not be serious about her, or Olivia didn't want to, which means she knew I wouldn't like him. I couldn't get a sense of what was going on. He seemed like a decent fellow from what she had told me. He had a car, a job, and he didn't live in his parents' basement. He treated her well, paid for dinner, and never restricted her contact with friends or me. So, no red flags. I planned a dinner, on my home soil. I figured if he would decline, it would show his true colours, and if he accepted, then that was a good sign. He thought he could stand up to a bit of motherly scrutinisation. I didn't ask Olivia if she wanted me to meet him. I basically said I wanted to and gave her the time and day. She was excited. Apparently, Mark had been asking to meet me. "It's all he ever talks about," she said. I thought she was being sarcastic. She wasn't. I asked her why it had taken her so long to introduce us. She said it just wasn't the right time. When she was telling me that the corner of her mouth upturned and her nostrils flared ever so slightly, that was her tell. She was lying. Interesting. I made a very nice dinner. I went with 3 courses to give me enough time to really get to know this boy. I also wanted enough time for him to relax and to see I wasn't some dragon lady protecting her princess from any frogs that came to kiss her. Bad metaphor, but you know what I am saying. I wanted him to get to know me as well. The night of the dinner had finally arrived, and as I prepared for the evening ahead, I found myself in a state of calm anticipation. It wasn't nerves that I felt, nor was it a bubbling excitement. Rather, I was just eager to finally meet Olivia's boyfriend. The smell of apricot-stuffed chicken parcels wafted from my oven, filling the kitchen with what I hoped was a comforting warmth. I went about the final preparations. Just as I was lost in my thoughts, a familiar voice rang out from the doorway, announcing Olivia's arrival with a casual, "Mum, I'm here." Her habit of never knocking, but instead announcing herself, never failed to bring a smile to my face. It was one of those endearing quirks that made her who she was. With a call to her to come into the kitchen, I quickly straightened my appearance in anticipation of the introduction. Olivia arrived in the room first. She looked radiant and beautiful, having clearly put in effort for the occasion. Her smile beamed with pride and happiness as she stepped forward to make the introduction. "Mum, I'd like you to meet Mark," she said, her voice filled with a blend of excitement and affection. I smiled at her and extended my hand to greet him. I couldn't help but feel a surge of joy at the sight of my daughter so genuinely happy. I looked at Mark just as he stepped forward and extended his hand. I did not shake it. Instead, I said, rather abruptly, "What the "How old are you?" To which he politely replied, 53. Right, time to address the big old elephant in the room. My 18-year-old daughter was dating a 53-year-old man. I'm just reminding you because I'm not proud of what happened next. Remember, she is a child, and he is older than the woman who birthed her. Keep that in mind as I tell you about that dinner. I'll just cover the lowest points which happened in between awkward silence, seething anger, and comments about the weather. Entree. Caprese salad. Served with a balsamic glaze. I asked Mark about himself, and before he could fully explain anything, I interrupted with a question about what decade he was born in. It was the 1950s, and I pointed out that Australia didn't even have colour TV back then. Maine. Apricot stuffed chicken parcels served with creamy mashed potato. I asked Mark if he had been married or had children. He said no, never, and I commented on knowing an immoral man who was exactly like that, throwing Olivia's father in her face. Dessert. Mini chocolate lava cakes served with fresh cream. The lava cake was a little sweet, but I was not. I asked Mark directly what he found attractive about girls. When he stumbled his reply, I followed up with a story about how Olivia was a high school student less than 6 months ago. After dinner drinks. Did not happen, Olivia rightfully fled with her cradle-snatching octogenarian. Yes, folks, I made that dirty old man sweat and suffer through that whole delicious meal and regretted nothing. The regret came later. 2012. Suspicious minds. I'm not usually the suspicious kind, but when an old man takes an interest in my daughter, I tend to take an interest in him. So, as anyone would, I Googled the hell out of him. I wanted to know everything. I didn't go so far as to hire a private detective or anything like that, but I did do a deep dive into his life. Well, when I say deep dive, as deep as I could in the shallow pool of his existence. So, there I was, a wannabe Sherlock Holmes, determined to uncover the mysteries of someone with a digital footprint thinner than my patience. Armed with my trusty laptop and a determination rivaling that of a squirrel trying to crack a walnut, I set off on my investigation. First stop, social media. No Facebook, no Twitter, not even a dusty old MySpace page lurking in the shadows. I even tried LinkedIn, thinking maybe he was a secret business tycoon, moonlighting as a dirty old man. Nope, just virtual tumbleweeds blowing through cyberspace. Undeterred, I dove deeper. Google searches turned up nothing but an old article about him selling off a construction company to a major housing developer. Seems he is rich and retired. That would account for his means and time to date an 18-year-old. Plus, I was slightly jealous of him, not Olivia, who gets to retire in their late 40s. Next, I turned to the dark web. Okay, not really, but my imagination was running wild at this point and nothing was off limits. Except the dark web, I'm not an idiot. But I half expected to stumble upon some dual life evidence, where he kept a wife and children in one state and my daughter in another. He didn't have family, not that I could find, no parents. The article said he was a self-made ward, very few friends, online anyway. So basically, he seemed to be a simple man living a simple life, and here I was, a caffeine-addicted cyber sleuth, stupidly trying to hunt him down. And so, try as I might, I didn't get any dirt on Mark Anderson. I did gain a newfound appreciation for the power of anonymity in a world where privacy is a rare and precious commodity. Strangely, as well, it brought me closer to him. We had similarities in our lives, dead parents a big one. Unfortunately, the other being we both loved my daughter. Speaking of which, all of this virtual interrogation was thankfully a bit of a distraction from reality. The real world where that infamous dinner with the boyfriend had caused a major rift between me and my child. 2012. Never gonna give you up. Not talking to Olivia for 2 months was a living hell. We had a brief polite exchange regarding necessary things, but the whole subject of Mark was off limits, and considering she was now set on building a life with him, it became a wall between us. I was heartbroken. The pit of my stomach was on fire every waking moment. My chest hurt, my brain ached, and my teary eyes stung from lack of sleep. I didn't want to forgive and forget and accept Mark with open arms, but I couldn't live without the other half of my heart. Olivia reached out to me about a second meeting with Mark. She was always the better person. She approached the conversation with a reasonable, grown-up logic. Unfair. So I agreed to meet again with Mark, this time at Olivia's place, and this time as a person meeting a person, not like a T800 meeting John Connor. Sweet 80s reference for you. I met with Olivia and Mark for lunch. Look, I am going to say it and probably sounds a little creepy, but once I stopped and looked at him, he was bloody hot. He had this George Clooney kind of handsome, good for his age and not trying too hard. He was dressed in youthful clothes, not idiotically young, but age-appropriately trendy. He had a small outline of an angel on his wrist, with the letter S shaded behind it. It was to remind him of his mother Sandra. Oh, sweet. He was polite and respectful and loved his mother. He maintained eye contact with me and was the perfect gentleman around Olivia, probably because he knew I would scratch his eyes out if he touched her in front of me. It was a successful lunch. I also liked that he hated social media. He found it intrusive and time-consuming, preferring real-world connections. I couldn't argue with that. He only had one account, a Facebook profile under the name of MacGyver. No wonder I couldn't find him. He set it up before there were so many cross-checks and managed to get away with a fake name for years. Olivia didn't get the joke, and trying to explain MacGyver only made matters worse. A mullet-sporting DIY genius who turns paperclips and duct tape into high-tech gadgets. Mark and I pissed ourselves laughing at her face as we became increasingly absurd in our examples of his resourcefulness. We had a great laugh at her expense. Sorry, baby girl, but at least we were bonding. I remember the real turning point in the conversation came when Olivia threw me under a bus and mentioned I was a groupie in the 80s. I think she was trying to steer us towards a common interest, the 80s, not groupies, and that was her weird way of doing it. I protested, Olivia, I wasn't a bloody groupie, I loved rock music was all. But Mark was very good about it. He told Olivia that even if I was a groupie, it wasn't a bad thing. He spun the whole thing around, explaining that a beautiful woman in the 80s was a muse, a source of artistic inspiration. Songs were sung about her, album covers were dedicated to her. She was a heartbreaker, a man-eater, and an unattainable goddess. By the end of it, I wished I was a groupie. But what had essentially happened was Mark stood up for me, and it was really special because he did it with genuine respect. He wasn't just reminiscing about the 80s like some sort of nostalgic throwback. He was sharing his lived experience. In a world where the retro lens was used with comedic effect, Mark's sincerity stood out. It felt like he wasn't just defending my honour, but also honouring my perspective. He was talking my language, and I loved it. I will admit I did force myself to see the best in him, especially after getting to know him a little better through background check. Yes, that's what we are calling it now. But there was a lot of good. I did have to bite my tongue a couple of times and resist the urge to tear him down every now and then. I guess that's only natural. But overall, the second time around, I found Mark charming. And as I sat there picking through the remains of the nuts and cheese board, I went from tolerating Mark to, yes, I am going to say it, actually really liking the man. 2012, Edge of a Broken Heart. Okay, readers, so here we find ourselves in the unusual position of me crushing on my daughter's boyfriend. You know, it's funny how life works sometimes. You can be going about your day, minding your own business, and suddenly, bam! Something unexpected happens and everything changes. That's pretty much how it was for me and Mark. It all started innocently enough. We met again at my favourite coffee shop. I was picking up a breakfast smoothie, and he had gone there by chance to grab a coffee. He went out of his way to go there, upon a friend's recommendation, and serendipitously, we met. Without Olivia around, he had this easygoing charm about him. We clicked at that lunch, and we just kept clicking. His aversion to technology meant he rarely had his mobile on him, which meant it was easy to forget he was in a relationship. With my daughter, yeah, I remember that bit. But there were no text messages, No checking social, no push notifications. It was just me and him. Funny story, and this is classic Mark. I went to his place once and in his desk was a list of all the Angela Cinders in the state. Crossed off one by one until it reached my name. Turns out he tried to look up my contact number, accidentally hit print all, and was left with this Scooby mystery as to which one was mine. I didn't have the heart to tell him he could have simply checked the address. His embarrassed puppy dog eyes were enough for me to say, "Oh, how annoying," and change the subject. He was such a Luddite, but I liked it. Our friendship developed on its own and revolved around our shared love of music. We'd spend hours talking about our favourite bands, swapping playlists, and debating the merits of vinyl versus digital. There was something special about the way music brought us together. It was like our own secret language. He loved the rock bands I loved. I even trusted him enough to dig up an old cassette and play him Hard as Steel. Of course, I didn't tell him it was me, but he got right into it straight away. By the end of the song, he was dancing around the lounge like an 80s rock god. Brilliant. He even pointed at me on the couch and mouthed the line, "You'll feel the devil in me," with a wink and a headbang. It was sexy as all hell. Probably sexier if he did have long hair to actually headbang with, but hey, I still appreciated the sentiment. What really sealed the deal was our chance meetings. It was as if the universe conspired to bring us together at the most unexpected times. Like that time we bumped into each other at the midnight screening of the original Star Wars trilogy. He whispered, "These aren't the droids you're looking for," into my ear, and I threw popcorn at him in surprise. We also found ourselves front row at the same tribute acts, belting out the lyrics to our favourite song in perfect harmony, and although we didn't hide our friendship from Olivia, I did notice her and Mark were becoming increasingly distant. I know what you're thinking. Maybe that was because her mum was dating her boyfriend, but look, it wasn't like that. Mark and I were just very close friends. Honestly, that's all. And then, one day, it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was in love with Mark. You totally saw that one coming, didn't you? It wasn't some grand declaration or a Hollywood-style confession. It was a quiet realization that crept up on me when I least expected it. Suddenly, everything clicked into place, and I knew that I couldn't imagine my life without him. So, I took a chance. I poured my heart out to him, telling him how I felt. And you know what? He felt the same way. Turns out, our serendipitous meetings weren't just random coincidences. They were the universe's way of nudging us together. We agreed straight away that nothing physically would ever come of it. We agreed to love each other platonically, and we agreed to never tell Olivia the true extent of our feelings. Ironically, we felt she was too young to understand. It's a very adult concept to understand a man, and a woman can love each other, be attracted to each other, and share common interest but not be romantically entwined. An unrealistic and totally stupid adult concept, but we promised each other it would work and we would do it for Olivia's sake, not our own. Our pact had the opposite effect. From that day on, we were more than just friends. We were, of course, still platonic, but now we were partners in crime, soulmates bound by our secret. So, what now? 2013, hanging on the telephone. One Saturday morning, doesn't matter which one, and I can't remember anyway, but it was Saturday and it was morning. I received 2 phone calls. The first call was from Olivia. She said, and I am paraphrasing, "As I sat across from Mark, the weight of my decision hung heavy in my heart. It wasn't supposed to end like this, but somehow we had grown apart, drifting further with each passing day until the gap between us seemed insurmountable. I sense he was distant. I watched as Mark toyed with his coffee cup, his eyes avoiding mine, betraying the turmoil within him. We had shared so much together, laughter, tears, dreams, and I could see his heart breaking. It wasn't easy admitting that our relationship had fizzled. I wanted to prove everyone wrong about our ages being a barrier, but I felt like we were clinging to memories of what once was, rather than embracing the reality of what had become. As we exchanged bittersweet smiles, a silent understanding passed between us. It was time to let go, to free ourselves from the shackles of a love that no longer served us. And though it pained me to say goodbye, I knew deep down that it was the right decision for both of us. The second call came from Mark. He said, and again I am paraphrasing, "Why was you phone engaged for so long?" She broke up with me. I tell you, sitting across from Olivia felt like I was trapped in some cheesy rom-com gone wrong. I mean, who breaks up over coffee? I didn't know what to do. I traced the rim of my coffee cup, trying not to look too eager, but honestly, I knew it was coming, and I was completely okay with it. We had nothing in common, and I'm sure she was only continuing to date me to spite her friends who said we wouldn't last. Anyways, she smiled, I smiled, and it was done. No hard feelings. You'd think I'd be over the moon, right? I mean, my daughter didn't end up with a broken heart. She decided to split from Mark. And to top it off, my best friend was now single, meaning I didn't have to feel guilty about hanging out with him so much. But for some reason, the whole situation left me feeling uneasy. There was something about the way it all went down that just didn't sit right with me. It was like Olivia jumped ship before she was pushed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark's excitement about moving on was somehow my doing. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm thrilled that things worked out this way. But there's this nagging little voice in the back of my head whispering, was it really supposed to happen like this? And suddenly, what should have been a moment of celebration felt more like I was facing a problem I had actually caused. So there I was, caught between relief and guilt, trying to make sense of it all. Maybe I was just overthinking things, or maybe there's more to this story than meets the eye. Either way, life loves throwing curveballs. 1 minute you're standing at the plate feeling confident with your game plan, bam! Life throws a pitch that leaves you swinging at thin air like you're trying to hit a mosquito with a sledgehammer. Well played, life, well played. But next time, maybe go easy on the spin. 2013, When Doves Cry. After Olivia and Mark called it quits, I found myself in a bit of a pickle trying to keep up meaningful friendships with both of them. Olivia's my child, so naturally my loyalties are with her. But man, letting go of Mark would be tougher than I thought. It was all going okay to start with. Balancing between Olivia and Mark was like walking a tightrope without a safety net. I tried my best to maintain separate spheres of interaction with each of them, honouring their confidences, staying neutral and essentially trying to be everything to everyone. It was exhausting, but for a while, I thought I was managing it all pretty well. I mean, I was there for Olivia when she needed a shoulder to cry on, and I could grab a beer with Mark without it feeling weird. We'd talk about stuff, joke around, and it was all good. But let's face it, Mark was now technically single and I was always single, and Olivia had moved on with some new boyfriend called Teabag or D-Bag or something stupid. He was harmless enough, and I knew Olivia was on the rebound, so he wouldn't be my son-in-law anytime soon. Thank God. But my point being, Mark and I had a kind of all clear to take things to the next level. Now, as with everything in this ridiculous situation, it wasn't that simple. I don't want to get graphic here, but I was chasing my daughter's sloppy seconds, if you get my drift. And even if you forget that, I was following the act of an 18-year-old. I'm not going to lie, my insecurities were holding me back. Plus, to be perfectly honest with you, I couldn't shake this whole, that's your daughter's boyfriend feeling. It was easier to deal with when there was no chance in hell we would be together. Now that option seemed more doable, I wasn't feeling it as much. We all tried to make it work. Olivia even brought Teabag or D-Bag or whatever around for a friendly family barbecue. Mark innocently mentioned a memory he shared with Olivia. That seemed strange. I mentioned the first time I met Mark and how much I hated him. That was weird. Then Olivia tried to explain how Mark thought I was a groupie and how funny it was that she didn't know MacGyver, which was a had-to-be-there kind of story. Anyway, Teabag or D-Bag or whatever finally asked, wait, how do you all know each other? So I started to explain the whole situation and it came out like some sort of sick mother and daughter fetish thing. So I tried to explain how it wasn't a sick mother-daughter fetish thing, and that just made it so much worse. It was awful. Teabag or D-Bag or whatever looked scared and basically left in disgust. Who could blame him, really? And after the friendly family barbecue, things were never the same between the three of us. I never mentioned Mark in front of Olivia, and never mention Olivia in front of Mark, but since I was either with one or the other, I was basically either dead silent around them or lying to them. Either way, awkward. Then the inevitable happened. Olivia dropped the bombshell. She straight up asked me to stop hanging out with Mark. It was like a punch to the gut. I mean, I get it. She's my daughter, and her feelings come first. But letting go of that connection with Mark wasn't something I couldn't take lightly. It felt like tearing apart a piece of myself, you know? Like suddenly, this person who had become such an integral part of my life was being pushed away, and I had to choose between my loyalty to Olivia and my own happiness. Mark and I weren't all about the 80s either. Yes, we had that shared experience of living through the heyday, but it felt like it was more than that. And after about 7 years without a man in my life, I liked the male company. He was a friend, my friend, and I wanted to keep him. Plus, you know, I was honestly convinced that I could make it work. I had this strong belief that with a little bit of time, all the awkwardness would just melt away, and we'd eventually look back on it and share a laugh. It's funny how we sometimes cling to that hope, isn't it? Like you're in the thick of a situation, and it's just so uncomfortable, but you're holding on to this idea that somehow it's all going to smooth itself out. I guess optimism has a funny way of playing tricks on us. But hey, in the end, isn't it those moments of uncertainty and awkwardness that make for the best stories down the line? I mean, let's face it, you could even write a book about it. In the end, I did what any parent would do. I put Olivia's needs above my own. But man, it hurt. Saying goodbye to Mark wasn't just about losing a friend. It was like losing a piece of my happiness. And even though I knew it was the right thing to do, it didn't make it any easier. Life had been chugging along with its usual mix of mundane routines and occasional surprises. Olivia was happy and everything had returned to normal. She was dating and working and going out and being young. She never seemed to dwell on the past. I was working and aging, and trying to convince myself that binge-watching Netflix counted as a productive hobby. We never mentioned the Mark thing. We mastered the art of selective amnesia, sweeping it under the proverbial rug of our minds and pretending that everything was rainbows and sunshine. And you know what? It was working. It was like a silent agreement between two spies, each pretending not to know about each other's covert operations. The more we pretended it never happened, the more it actually seemed like it had never happened. Out of sight, out of mind. Life was finally returning to normal, and I was okay with that. Until New Year's Eve 2013. It had been about 4 months since I last heard from Mark when the phone rang. It was the landline to my house, a relic from a bygone era that I kept around mainly because it came bundled with my internet plan. The sound of its ring was so rare that it startled me. I hadn't given the number out to anyone. I debated ignoring it. I walked toward the phone and hesitated before answering, the rational part of my brain whispering that it was likely just another telemarketer or wrong number. But something, a curious blend of nostalgia and intuition, compelled me to pick up the receiver. Looking back, I wish I hadn't. "Hello?" I said tentatively, expecting the usual spiel about insurance or surveys. To my surprise, it wasn't a stranger on the other end. It was Mark. His voice, familiar yet somehow distant, filled my ears. I liked that. I couldn't help but wonder why he was calling on the landline of all things. Had he lost his mobile? Was this some kind of emergency? Or perhaps, in a world dominated by digital communication, he was typically craving a taste of the past. Our conversation was brief, polite even, but there was an underlying tension, a sense of that something else still hung in the air, waiting to be acknowledged. Mark spoke of vague plans and routine events, leaving me with more questions than answers. He never asked about Olivia. I was relieved. He seemed nervous, which I found endearing. He casually mentioned the hotel he was staying at, although he didn't explain why he was staying there. It sounded like an invitation for me to come around. I sensed he wanted to see me. It was as if he was dangling a provocative carrot in front of me, hinting at an invitation without quite spelling it out. I said I was busy. I wasn't. I said I would love to see him, but it wouldn't be appropriate. Would it? I said I didn't want him to contact me again. I lied. I said goodbye before he could respond. I was a coward. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It was as if that unexpected call had stirred something dormant within me, awakening a sense of curiosity and apprehension in equal measure. I made a promise to myself I would not go to his hotel, despite how naughty and horny that idea made me feel. I would not go to his hotel. I made a promise to my daughter I would not go to his hotel. This is stupid. He probably doesn't even want me there. I am not going to that hotel. 2014. Hotel California. The first day of 2014, and my self-mantra to not go to Mark's hotel room was still holding strong, right up until 8:46 a.m, when I knocked on his hotel door. Hey, I get it. I promised I wouldn't go to the hotel room, and honestly, I genuinely thought I wouldn't. I stood at the door, telling myself I could turn around and leave. As I was telling myself that standing at a door didn't mean I was going to go in, my hand betrayed me and rapped on the door with 3 forceful knocks. Everything in my mind was telling me not to go there. Everything in my heart was telling me go there anyway. But sadly, I think it was everything between my legs that made me knock on the door. Come on now, don't judge me. You might have gone there as well if you were in the same situation. It's easy to sit there, reading my words and thinking, nah, no way would I do that. But wait, would it be nah? If you wanted love and it was calling to you through the landline, would it be no way? If you could justify the pain it may cause by the pleasure it definitely would be. Would some part of you be a little inquisitive? Would some part of you believe you owed him at least this much? And ask yourself, would some part of you just want this? After years of sacrifice for another, maybe it was time that you got something you wanted. You don't know until you are standing in front of that hotel room door. So let's pretend you're not judging me and keep going. Okay, back to the hotel. When I really think about it, as I am right now, I am sure that at that time I was not going there to have sex. Don't get me wrong, I was curious, very curious, and how that whole scenario would play out went through my mind almost constantly since I had last seen Mark. I mean, we were so good together, so compatible. To have that kind of synchronicity in a physical form would be awesome. We had joked about our sex lives, spoken about desire, devotion, obsession. It was like years of foreplay, both of us talking up our game, both of us imaging being together. It was playful and naughty. It was us. Think about harnessing that kind of teasing for years and then releasing it in one big almighty fuck. A rage of passion, years of fantasy, years of self-pleasuring at the thought of each other, years of those unfulfilled self-orgasms, and there I was presenting myself for his pleasure. Surely it would be the fuck of all ages. That was the fantasy anyway, but was I being realistic? Let's keep it real for a second. I knew I could never live up to the thought of what could have been. I went there just to witness how much he desired me. I went there to hear how much he wanted me, to see his physical reaction to me being there. It was like I wanted to feel that kind of craving again. Not a mum, not a worker bee, not a middle-aged nobody paying bills and getting fuel on the discount days. I just wanted to be an object of desire, even for that brief moment between when he opened the door and I explained that I only came there to say goodbye. I suppose I wanted to feel that sexual power again. Honestly, it was as innocent as that. The door opened and Mark was there. Oh no, he smelt good. Real good. He looked good too, like really, really good. Suddenly, all the bullshit I had been telling myself about banging each other senseless disappeared. I was just happy to see him again. He gave me a smile that said the same. A smile that didn't say, do me here right now, just a smile that said it was great to see me again. We hugged. The hug went on a little too long, but it just felt nice to be in his arms, and the way he squeezed me felt safe. It felt nice, and I held on to that for a few seconds more than I should have. He motioned for me to sit on the bed. Wait up! I know what you are thinking, and it wasn't like that. It was just the only spot to sit. The place was a mess, like he had spent all night drinking and crying. It seemed kind of sad, and the thought of a pity fuck entered my mind. I know, sorry, but I couldn't help myself. Then he looked at me, looked right into me. I could feel the intensity of his stare, unravelling the deepest recesses of my soul. It was as if his eyes held an unspoken passion, like a magnet was pulling us into a shared universe of desire. It was ridiculous how strong that moment was. I was suspended in the gravity of his eyes, breath caught in my throat as the world blurred into insignificance. His red-rimmed eyes spoke a language of longing and connection, leaving me with a heart pounding so loud I was certain he could hear it. I think I literally stopped breathing. Then he spoke. Now, before I get to that, have you ever had a moment in life that you clearly remember? Not like a recall or basic memory, but a moment that when you think about it, you are there. Your skin feels the temperature of that room on that day. You can smell the air of that very moment, feel every second of it. You are present. Well, this moment was that moment for me. I won't ever forget it. I wanted to interrupt his words, you know, like they do in the movies. When the leading man is about to say something wonderful, and the leading woman interrupts him with something like, "You had me at hello." I wanted to do that. He opened his mouth to speak, and I didn't want him to have to say anything, so I leant in towards him. I guess I was going to kiss him. Maybe. I don't know. I don't want to admit that was what I was going to do because I wasn't there to lead him on. Anyway, it's all irrelevant now. I leant in towards him. His face was close to mine, and he was whispering. I think to himself, I don't think I was supposed to hear, but I was close enough to overhear. Finally get to fuck Angel Sins. That sentence jolted me like a taser gun. The reality hit me hard. Suddenly the moment was not like the movies anymore, unless that movie was about two middle-aged people in a filthy hotel room about to do something they would regret. I leant back and looked at him. It didn't feel right. I know. I asked him what he said, and I think that scared him because he realised that I had heard him. He grabbed my shoulders. "No," he said. A red flag, a gut feeling, intimidation. My body instinctively reacted, rigid with fear. "Please," I begged. "Please," he insisted. It was like we were both pleading for the same thing, but with opposite intentions. I wasn't fully aware of what was happening. My mind was still on finally get to fuck Angel Sins, and the question of how on earth did he know I was Angel Sins? And why did he say it like that? It sounded like a threat. Maybe not a direct threat, but some sort of revenge. I can't explain, but it stuck in my mind. It was worrying me more than the unwanted physical attention my frozen body was now receiving. He was unaware of my thoughts, and too busy with his own thoughts to see what was going on. The way I saw it at the time was I had two choices. I could try the epic fucking, see how that went, or I could follow a more important line of questioning about Angel Sins. I should have taken the epic fucking. Hindsight is the lens through which we see the lessons of our past with the clarity of the future. This is a story about choices, and in that moment, I chose Angel Sins. "Mark, what did you just say?" I pushed him away and looked into his eyes. I didn't want this moment to be lost. I wanted him to hear me, to see me. Not this myth he seemed to have been holding on to, but to hear Angela speak. He heard me, but did he? He answered, but almost as an afterthought. "Nothing, Angel. Please hush now." I decided to ignore the fact that he knew my hidden past and just address the present issue. I figured if I could diffuse his imagination, bring him back to the now, I could make excuses, get out and live happily ever after. "Angel Sins was a long time ago," I said sternly. "I'm not her anymore." It was like I had flicked a trigger, destroyed his dream or something. It was weird. Mark's eyes changed. That open and inviting gaze was now a penetrating stare that seemed to cut through a veneer of innocence. His pupils were dilated, swallowing the light, as if consuming the last shreds of reality that resided there. He held me tighter than was comfortable. I noticed his posture changed, his facial expression hardened. It was like watching the physical transformation of a demented mind. I was scared, but I smiled, trying to relax the moment. "You know what I mean?" I added. I know, he replied kind of sternly. He started talking about always owning me, about us being together forever, no matter what. I can't remember exactly because I was trying to comprehend the situation. He was talking, but my ears were thinking. Ears thinking. Sounds stupid, but what I mean is, my thoughts occupied all my senses. Whether it was a self-preservation thing, or I just didn't want to be there, my brain started to solve the angel sins mystery on its own. He mumbled an apology. "I'm sorry, Angel. This is the way it has to be," and touched my face, his hand caressing my cheek. It was tender and terrifying. My mind raced as I pieced together the fragments of our history. A realization started to form its own story. I connected the dots. "You are all I need. Things will be better now," he said quite happily. His hand was at my neck now, pushing my face to the side as he kissed my earlobes. I could feel the touch, but not the caress. I was numb, immobile. The phony Facebook profile, work mobile phone, the way he never directly responded to my messages, but always calling back. The cute technophobe act was a smart way to dodge leaving digital footprints. A suspicious void in the technological landscape. A non-traceable relationship. "I knew you would reject me. I knew it would come to this," he whispered as his hand found my breast. His fingers lightly pinching my nipple as his palm cupped my breast, gently bouncing it. I wanted to pull away, but he was distracted and I had time to think. That long list of surnames, not a print-all mistake but a clue at the relentless pursuit to locate Angela Cinders. He was hunting me down. Found the state I lived in on social media, maybe. Why else would he meticulously strike off names from the list? I excused that so easily. His head lowered. "I was patient," he said. "I let you have your space. I deserve you now." His mouth pressed into my breast. His lips brushed past my nipple. He was teasing himself, and I was hit by a wave of nausea. Was that how he found my daughter? Happenstance on the way to find me? In fact, their meeting, Olivia told me about his perfect opening line, lifted straight out of her favourite movie. Was he stalking her or was he stalking me? Why would he date her, if it would complicate things with me? Was she the same age I was back then? No, I was older. She is younger. Did he want his own jail bait? I said his name. He didn't hear me. He was in his own world now. I'm sure I said stop. I said no, but I was just standing there. I should have moved. I couldn't. He started talking to himself. "I am yours now. You have always been mine." My mind started to replay the accidental encounters, serendipitous moments. They started to feel more like they were calculated. Every meeting, every connection, surely a result of him shadowing my every move. My mind clicked each piece into place. It felt like it was all coming together with some kind of sinister precision, like a puzzle crafted by a mastermind. He gave in to his tease and opened his mouth wide as he gulped at my tit. It was a strange sensation. I looked down at this man, devouring me, and all I could think of was how he called me on a landline to get me to his hotel room. How did he even get the number? What the crap was going on? Was this really happening? Then Mark must have finally sensed my unresponsiveness. "You don't ignore me again," he said desperately. His hands were frantic, grabbing, pulling. "I will not be dismissed. You will feel me." Feel me? Then I remembered. He knew the words to my song. At the time, I thought it was so catchy that he picked up on them quickly, but that line he mouthed to me while the song was playing. I remembered it only appears once in the whole song. He couldn't have remembered it from an earlier verse. It's not even in the official lyrics. You'll feel the devil in me. Why choose that line? He knew the line. He knew the song. He said he had no idea who Angel Rain was. He did. He lied. If he knew Angel Rain, he sure as shit knew Angel Sins. What was he playing at? He gave up on the pointless attempts of arousal. He started to undress my non-responsive body. His arm reached across my face. The final part of the puzzle clicked. The frigging angel tattoo. Angel with an S. Angel Sins. The whole mother story was a lie. I was lost in my panic, trapped in the realization that I had a full-blown stalker with 40 years of obsession and delusion, about to unleash whatever sick fantasies he had. Was he the boy in the homemade shirt? My one groupie? Was he in the car yelling? Was he a fan? Was he in a rival band? Who the fuck was Mark Anderson? Suddenly he stopped his physical advancement, and he started explaining our destiny. To be honest, I wasn't even listening to his crazed lecture. I was still frozen with fear as he undressed himself and exposed his readiness. That's when I knew I was in a precarious situation. Fight or flight? How was this going to go? Then he mentioned Olivia's name. My focus went from trying to understand what was happening to squarely focused on him and his erect penis. He yelled something. The words, "Don't matter now." It was the sound of his voice. It wasn't a normal yell. It was impossibly loud and guttural, filled with pain and madness. Like decades of 80's, fueled neurosis escaped from his soul in one big violent verbal explosion. Like I said, I can't remember what he said about Olivia. A threat, an insult, some comment, but when an angry naked man with a hard-on screams your daughter's name for whatever reason, you see red. I was livid. Fight or flight. I was in fight mode for sure. I might not remember the words, but I sure remember the feeling. Like a mama bear protecting her cub. A surge of maternal instinct that overpowered any previous desire I had for him. I didn't care what he had to say from then on in. I was in mama mode. She was the one and only love in my life. I will not betray my daughter, and I will not let her be hurt by anyone regardless of how good they smelt or how impressive their erection was. It was game on. I will protect her, and I will protect myself. He screamed. I screamed. He yelled. I yelled. I couldn't make sense of any of it. It was all just meaningless noise. My mind wasn't in the moment. It was focused on Olivia and what my past actions were doing to her now. I was ashamed. I was half-naked screaming about his dishonesty, and he was half-naked yelling about my dishonesty. Again, we were bellowing about the same thing but with opposite intentions. It was a nonsensical yelling match, just a tit-for-tat attack that seemed to have no end, until it did end. And then, he was gone, and I collapsed with exhaustion, gathering my clothes and my thoughts. It left me thinking that I might have won the fight, but had I won the war? It was an intense argument, let me tell you now. I wouldn't wish that kind of exchange on anyone, and I'm glad the hotel was pretty much empty at that time of day. God knows I would have called the police if I had heard us, but as quickly as it all exploded, it had ended. It happened so fast, I guess it went unnoticed. So, I didn't get my epic fuck after all, and it all ended rather bitterly. But truthfully, I could not have been happier. Everything happened the way it had to happen. Maybe that's why the universe took me to that hotel room, to face the reality of temptation and to see Mark for his true self. You know, life is full of lessons, and in that hotel room I learnt that fantasy is not a better form of reality, that lust is not the same as love, and when you are pushed hard enough, you can count on yourself to do what you have to do. I am thankful for that lesson, and I am thankful that we never heard from Mark again. 2014. I can see clearly now. New Year's resolutions are stupid. I hate them. A promise made to keep up with a tradition that has no significance to anything other than the fitness industry. New year, new me. I generally make, or rather tell people I make, the same resolution each year. Learn to juggle. I find that it is unusual and witty and keeps people off my back long enough to forget that I made a promise to learn to throw things around. But I will admit, I like watching the failures. It fulfills my need to be right. Like Sarah, who pledges to read a book a week, her eyes sparkling with determination. I nod in encouragement, mentally betting on how long it will take before YouTube lures her back into its irresistible grasp. Sure enough, by mid-January, I know her bedside table has become a graveyard of half-finished novels. Or Greg, proudly proclaiming to anyone who will listen that he's going to hit the gym every single day in the new year. I give him a thumbs up, secretly wondering if his gym membership card will be gathering dust by February. Then I notice by March that he weighs more than last year. He mumbles something about muscle weighing more than fat, and we never speak of it again. Olivia's New Year's resolution was to spend less time on social media, so naturally, she announced it to the entire social media world. Then, in a hilarious twist of irony, she proceeded to flood her feed with daily updates on how she was resisting the urge to scroll through social media. Bless her heart, she's like a walking meme of her generation. I remember I once mentioned that Mark would not be in our lives anymore. She gave me, "Why are you talking about him look?" As far as she was concerned, it was done a long time ago. It was still fresh in my mind, and I think I wanted to say it out loud to make sure it was real. Real it was. I never forgot about Mark, but I never looked over my shoulder either. Around this time in my life, the after Mark era began. I felt that the new year was a perfect time to reflect on past mistakes. Also, more importantly, to promise that I will do and be better in the future. It was out of character for me, but out of character seemed to be a new trend. So, in January of 2014, I did make a New Year's resolution, a real one this time. I promised myself to live in every moment. Yeah, cliché I know, but look, if I am going to surrender to the cliché, I might as well be cliché about it. Plus, after everything, I felt like I needed a bit of cliché in my life. An affirmation to cling to. So, living in the moment is what I did, and what I continue to do. It's not all roses. I do hear the past whispering its tales, and I feel the future is uncertain. But somehow, living in this moment we call now, lies the heart of certainty. Now is all I can guarantee. Plus, I think I really should learn to juggle. Prologue. Memory remains. In the acid-washed haze of the 1980s, Angel Sins was on a mission to conquer the world as the next big rock sensation. Armed with hairspray that could deplete the ozone layer and a wardrobe that could rival a Broadway musical, I strutted around in ripped-up jeans and a studded bra top. Our path to local fame was paved with denim, teased hair, and a relentless desire to live the life of our rock idols. I was something back then, as the blistering solos rang out. The dance floor transformed into a sea of swaying bodies and synchronized headbanging. The smoke machine worked overtime, enveloping us in a haze of mystique that only added to the aura of rock stardom. It was all I ever wanted, all I needed. The sold-out gigs at the town halls turned into well-attended shows at the pub, that turned into the afternoon performances at the community centres, that turned into free shows at shopping centres. Each performance etching our names a bit deeper into local folklore. Fame, as they say, is a fickle lover. As quickly as we rose, we found ourselves falling faster. The 80s ended, and so did our meteoric rise. The world moved on to grunge, leaving us with empty hairspray cans and memories of a time when our dreams felt within reach. The energy of my youth surrendered to the reality of living. With a child to raise and bills to pay, I was just another rat in the race. Another face in the crowd. I was just another has-been. That really never was. Future world. Today my hair is tamed, not teased, and can you even buy hairspray anymore? My studded bray top is whereabouts unknown in those jeans. I traded in the cling wrap look for a reasonably priced comfort fit, which might sound like I'm not making an effort, but what's the point? I wear the same clothes every day now. My days are very routine. Wake up, roll call, breakfast, yard time, lunch, recreation, shower, roll call, lockdown and lights out. Rinse and repeat. Sounds like I am in some kind of prison, doesn't it? No, I'm not in some kind of prison. I am literally in prison. In case you haven't guessed it, I am halfway through a life sentence for murder. Only 10 years to go. DNA is such a bitch. A molecule of guilt found at the scene of the crime. My alibi was watertight. I told no one of what I did, not even Olivia. It took me 5 hours to clean the motel room. I dropped the body kilometres out to sea. Hired the boat in a false name, paid cash. I even went to work on Monday like nothing had happened. I felt no remorse. My daughter was safe. I was safe. It was done. Like I told you, it was clear of what I had to do, and I did it. It was over. 62 days after the hotel room thing, a body was discovered by a deep-sea fisherman. He was illegally trawling for gemfish. He got a fine for bottom trawling the ocean floor, and I got life in prison for the murder of Mark Anderson. Of course I pled self-defence, but the jury didn't buy it. At best it was preemptive self-defence, which is not even a legal thing, apparently. He didn't actually hurt me or my daughter. He threatened it, and to me that threat was real. It was real. But for a group of strangers who weren't there, it was just words, and my actions was a disproportionate response. They didn't hear his rage. They couldn't see his eyes or feel the wrath that radiated from his being. Excessive force, maybe, but what would they have done if they had come face to face with evil? Looking back, I have a clear sense that I would not change a thing. Not sure if my mind believes this to protect myself from the insanity of what-ifs, but most of the time I have adapted well, and I am at peace with my lot in life. I follow the routine. I slow to the pace, and I make the most of what I have. But I have scars and inner monsters. Don't we all? On the days when I am playing cards in the recreation room, telling jokes and listening to fantastical stories, like Nana Marine who accidentally killed her husband with hash cookies and was let off by the judge who gave her the recipe. These days, most days, the monsters don't need any answers. I believe my life has found its fate. I am strong and the monsters are asleep. On the nights when I can hear crying from the other cells, and the darkness of tortured emotions strangles me, the monsters want answers. My brain scrambles to find the precise point in time where it all went wrong. What if I let him have his way? What if I didn't have a child to protect? If I didn't learn guitar? If he didn't see me play? If I was born 10 years later, 10 years earlier? Those nights I am weak, and I cannot accept my fate. The monsters are loud. Heavy stuff. Hey, and you might be thinking, was it all worth it? That's an excellent question. I'm not sure how to answer it. I am incarcerated, and by definition am not free. But sometimes freedom exists in my mind. I have made friends. Most of the women in here are like me, what I call justifiably guilty. Guilty of doing the right thing. I am fed. I have a roof over my head. I have lots of free time to read. Haha, in your face, Sarah. And as you probably guess by now, a lot of free time to write. I could be worse off, I suppose. And since you are asking, I could be better off as well. I have no choice in what I eat, no choice in what I wear, no choice in what time I get up or go to bed. I can't do anything without permission. I have no privacy and my bed is uncomfortable. My sheets always smell like mothballs. I am a number, I am a criminal, and I am treated as such. Olivia comes to visit me every month. She shows me photos of my grandson. He is 4 years old and looks like she did at that age, but far better behaved. He will be 13 when I get out. I made the choice that she not bring him here. I would rather he thought I was dead than see me in this place wearing these clothes. Timed meetings, supervised conversations, surrounded by inmates. No thank you. He doesn't need to know of this world I live in. Olivia agreed. At first she wanted to fight, she wanted to appeal, and she wanted me to be free at all cost, whatever it would take. She was all in. I love her for that. That's my girl right there, always fighting for the underdog. But I explained to her that I didn't want that. I didn't want her life, her time, her efforts to be about me, to be about the criminal rights and legal avenues. I wanted her to be free of this. The only thing that makes my situation bearable is her freedom, safety, and joy. Besides, we have a plan. In 1 decade from now, I will be Great Aunt Angela, returning home after living abroad for 20 years. I will attend my grandson's first teenage birthday party. I will squeeze him tight and pretend not to know all his stories and listen to him tell me everything his mother had already shared with me. It will be wonderful to hear it all in his own words. I will spoil him rotten and tell him how amazing his mum is, how I knew his grandma, and how much she would have loved him. When he is a little older, I'll regale him with nostalgic tales of the 80s, unbelievable stories of when his grandmother was young, nearly famous, and believed anything was possible. As I look through the bars of my small cell window at the stunning blue sky outside, I picture a moment with him. I can see it now. I will sit down beside him, wondering where to begin. Then he will look at me, wondering what I wanted to say. I will smile, he will smile, and I will casually start our chat with, "Let's talk about the 80s."